All right, Dr. Lauren McPhillips, thanks for joining. How are you?
No problem. Glad to be here.
Yay. So we're basically just trying to learn a little bit about the PhD process and how it works. And since you're a professor, maybe give us a little intro to who you are and where you are.
Sure. So I'm currently at Penn State University. I'm actually co-appointed across two departments, so have kind of some insight to how things can even be different across different fields and departments. But I'm in primarily in a civil and environmental engineering department, as well as an agricultural and biological engineering department. And I've been at Penn State for about 3 years now, so have a few years under my belt of experience dealing with, inquiries and applications from prospective students.
Yeah. And where did you do your PhD prior to joining Penn State?
I did all of my degrees at Cornell University, and I had a bit of a mixed background myself, where I didn't come through, the same major along the whole way. So my undergrad was actually in earth science, and then I ended up going into biological and environmental engineering for a grad degree, kind of, in part because that was where the research I was interested in was based, but I also kind of found myself drawn towards questions that were more thinking about solutions and design of those solutions, which is obviously something you tend to find in more of an engineering field.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And so, and then you are on the tenure track, right? So you're becoming a professor, and was that always your goal along the whole process, or how did you find that?
Definitely not. I always found myself interested in teaching and research, but I definitely contemplated other pathways, like more policy focused realms as well. But I enjoyed doing research, obviously, which is why I went to grad school, kind of wanting to do applied research to help solve environmental problems. And then from there, also made sure I got teaching experience there as well. Kind of always knew that that was an interest, but then, found myself in a postdoctoral position after that at Arizona State University. That was this very big collaborative interdisciplinary position. And, I, I, I didn't intend to just go for academic positions, but I guess I was well set up for that. I had a lot of good experience. I had tried to make sure I was publishing and kind of setting myself up for different options. And so even though I was, looking at some more policy focused positions, and some sort of non-governmental stuff, I was also applying to academic positions, and, was lucky to have one work out. So, I think I tried to be intentional about sort of getting myself experience in different realms, depending on what kind of the job market looks like when I was ready to get out of school.
I think that's good advice no matter where you are in your career, right? Like you can't always predict, future things, but giving yourself the most options is clearly beneficial.
Yep.
That's awesome. And so, and you're very much enjoying your time at Penn State and all the cool work you get to do.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think everybody can say there's added stressors during a global pandemic. And there's challenges in sort of a tenure track position where you're trying to balance a lot of balls and keep them all in the air at once. I sort of feel like there's I should have taken a class in business management sometimes, but
Yeah.
it's also fun that I get to work on so many different problems, and my students get to go after questions that they're really interested in, and we get to just, try to solve exciting and
Yeah.
important questions.
What's the, general trend in your research right now?
So I broadly work in the field of urban hydrology and water quality, and with a specific focus on stormwater management. So we do a lot of field-based research. So it took time when I first got to Penn State to kind of get established at a new place, because a lot of my work is very place-based. Wanting to study existing water, like local watersheds, and existing sort of stormwater management practices to understand how they're working and how we can design them better, kind of getting lab facilities up and going. So we do a range of things from like kind of testing small scale things in the lab about like how can we better design stormwater management practices, evaluating things in the field, and doing some spatial data synthesis based work as well. I think that was something easy to get up and going when I first got here, but also in a pandemic, as everyone knows, there had to be a lot of
Digital.
shifts, to what you're thinking about for a little bit when you can't necessarily get to your lab or do
That's an
certain things.
interesting point. How do you think the pandemic has shifted things for graduate students, both like existing graduate students and those trying to get in?
Yeah, I think one challenge for sure in students considering grad school, I know, is trying to get research experience. And that's something that we certainly value in prospective students, is having some prior experience. It's definitely not a deal breaker, but it's certainly nice to have some experience under your belt.
Right.
And so it's, when you're an undergraduate, if you have some inkling that you might want to go to grad school for a research-based degree, it's good to try to get some experience. And, I know a lot of professors have just kind of not had the bandwidth or not had access to their labs to be able to host students right now. And so I think, for those of us, I've tried my best to kind of keep some undergraduate researchers going, but, on the side of evaluating grad applications, I think, all of us understand that these have been unique conditions now, and that, maybe students have tried or wanted to get research experience, but it couldn't necessarily happen. And so, we try to always have an open mind, but more so right now, knowing that there have been unique constraints on, some of the experiences that people could get. Similarly, I think with different sorts of internships even as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a very good point. So, so what do you typically look for like ideal PhD candidates? You talked about research experience or other things.
Yeah, it's nice to have, you want a background that kind of has some of the relevant sort of coursework for setting you up for a certain grad program. But that being said, we also get students who kind of come from like related fields that are kind of looking for a change. And so it's just kind of important to make, if you're that sort of case, make it clear why, you're kind of interested in making a change, and that you're maybe, committed to making up some coursework that might be required for the program you're going into. I think, for example, one of my colleagues has a student with a computer science background who kind of found themselves drawn towards water resources later, and they were able to get a little experience in more of the water realm, but like, they, in their grad application, I think just that passion really came through for leveraging their intense background in computing and those sorts of tools for investigating water resources questions, and that they could bring all these unique sort of experiences, and were capable and passionate about sort of putting in the extra effort to make up some of the background in water resources that they didn't necessarily have. And so honestly, like, passion for something can go a long way, and you want to make that clear for sure.
That's true. But you talked about like making it clear that they're willing to take courses or whatnot. So would you recommend them like saying in their application, I understand I don't have this course, but I'm looking forward to taking it? Or like, because you only have so much space. So like, how do you approach that?
Yeah, it's I don't know that I have a perfect answer. It's something that, a lot of times, in most cases, you want to be reaching out to a particular professor that would be your prospective advisor, and they might be able to give you more specific advice on this. For a PhD program, you have a little bit more time, and so you might have a little room to, be able to make up like, 2 extra courses that you didn't have in undergrad that are really important for the sort of grad program or research trajectory that you're on. But sometimes we find that, it's really challenging when you're when you're limited by the funding that you have to support a student, that, it can add an extra semester on to sort of have them take those extra courses after they already come into the program. And so we might, require that they like make them up in community college or something, or an online program before coming into our program. So it kind of depends, I think, on the grad program you're coming into, what the sort of funding situation is, and the constraints on the timing of that.
So it basically requires a conversation with either faculty or administrators or something to understand the if you're coming from an outside field. Like, did you have to do any of that? Because you said your undergrad was in a different field.
I did actually, yeah. And that was something that came up in that, like, I came from earth science and then was coming into environmental engineering. And so when I got into grad school, fortunately, I had the flexibility to kind of quickly catch up once I got into grad school. And so, for example, I took differential equations and a computer programming course my first semester when I got back into grad school, to kind of catch up on some of those key courses that you're expected to have from a traditional environmental engineering background.
Okay. So yeah, that's kind of the way I typically think about it, that like you can catch up in it. Yeah, you might have to have a heavier load for a semester or two than your counterparts, but it's not like undoable. Yeah, okay. And you talked about passion being really important. How do you know someone's passionate about what they're what they want to do, what they're applying for?
Definitely the personal statement that's generally requested with applications is a key area I look to for that. So I read through it and I want to understand, why are you looking to come into our program? Why are you interested in working with me? You want to make sure, to make that clear. Usually those statements are some balance of, what's your background, where does your interest come from, but also looking forward, why are you looking at this program? Why are you a good fit? Why do you want to pursue research in this area? And then, that's, the hook to kind of, generate future interest in reaching out to that student. Perhaps they've already been in contact with, a prospective advisor, and you've gotten an email from them. And so that at that point, if I see they're interested in my area, they seem to have, some relevant experience, and hopefully I can sense their interest.
Yeah.
Then I would reach out to them and schedule a phone or video call and kind of learn a little bit more of the things that you can't necessarily see from an application, hear about their experience, hear about their interest in grad school. And that's usually the next step before, making some sort of a decision on the application.
Yeah, I definitely agree. It's 100% you need to talk to human beings, because there's only so much you can learn from a website, and there's only so much you can learn from a resume. So kind of two-way street. And I guess, at what period of time are people typically reaching out to you, and like when does that happen?
It is highly variable. Certainly a lot of students are reaching out in the beginning of the, what's a typical fall semester. So maybe like, September, October, sometimes even a little bit earlier. Often applications are due in like the December to January sort of time frame. Sometimes though it's not, students are getting in touch later, and that's not necessarily like, it doesn't mean that, I guess what I'm trying to say here is sometimes funding comes through late. And so like, maybe you kind of made a later decision for grad school and you feel like you kind of missed the boat on reaching out to people, and you're kind of getting in touch maybe at the beginning of the spring semester. For some programs, they may have really rigid deadlines, but I would say that it doesn't hurt to reach out to people if you kind of find yourself realizing later that you're interested in grad school, because funding for some project may come through and they're looking for a grad student all of a sudden to be able to get on that project in the coming fall. And so,
or vice versa.
While there is like a general guidance of get in touch with prospective advisors in the fall, I wouldn't say that, the funding scene, things can happen at weird times, and sometimes there's sudden opportunities that come up as well at weird times.
So alternatively, if I contacted you like today, like say like in April, and you had a grant just come through, could I start even before next fall? Like, could I get, that stuff moving quicker or?
It's possible, again, I say it's like a universe, it could be different in different programs. But in ours, generally, we have a lot of flexibility. And so that is there. If we have funding for a student and we need to move fast and want to get them in like that fall, and we've, just heard now in the spring, we usually can, we're starting to get towards the cutoff where it might become more challenging. But
Yeah.
generally, there's a lot of flexibility. And even past that April 15th deadline, sometimes we still can get students in for that following fall. It certainly is more challenging with international applicants because there's more time for visas. So there's a little less flexibility there.
Have you found that it's harder to get international students in your labs, or is there any differences between domestic and international students in terms of like recruiting and all of that?
So right now, I actually have 100% international students actually. Okay. So we have strong interest in our grad program from international applicants, and so happen the students were the best fit are the ones that I currently have, and they're from a very diverse range of places and programs. And some of them had been in the US previously for, like, for example, a previous master's program. But sorry, I'm forgetting what your original question
That's okay.
was.
Just if there's any differences between international and domestic, the application process, if it's.
Yeah. So the application itself is the same. Sometimes we have to be careful about the timeline related to visas and when we make some late acceptances. Under non-pandemic times, we have an in-person visitation weekend or couple of days for our program. And so we do try to bring in students for that. And certainly we can't, we can't bring in people from overseas for that. So if it does happen to be an international student in the US for other reasons, like a master's program or other job, we potentially can accommodate them visiting.
Interviewing them before they've been accepted or after they've been accepted?
So in our program, it's not a set either way. Some students may have been accepted. It's
interesting.
There's a lot of
wiggle room.
Some grad programs have, go one way or the other. For ours, there's either, a strong inclination to accept, or maybe, and in that case, maybe it's kind of like a final interview stage, or perhaps someone has made the decision that they've already been accepted. And we for sure make that clear either way. It's kind of a case by case basis. But the idea is to show the student the university, but also for you to get to know them a little bit better as well. So
okay, 1 second, I'm gonna let my dog out. That makes sense, because you need that flexibility. Like sometimes you do want to, get an actual interview with someone before you really commit to stuff. And then also them too, right? Like, they want to make sure it's a good fit before they commit. And
exactly.
Like 4 years.
Yeah, so with international prospective students who are overseas at the time, we kind of just can rely on video calls, right? And so we may try to give a sort of virtual tour maybe, and maybe have an extra video call to kind of follow up questions if we are strongly interested in a student. But in a lot of those cases, the student may be coming to the campus without physically previously being there when they end up joining our program. But that is what it is.
Oh yeah, we got to make it work. Okay, and is there anything so besides passion and some research experience, anything that you think makes people really successful once they get there and start doing the program?
So I would say certainly independent thinking and motivation and a good work ethic are really important. So it's a key thing when you're talking to a prospective advisor to understand their advising philosophy, and so are they are they sort of a micromanager and want to meet with you regularly and see, deliverables and kind of meeting checkpoints very often, or some advisors may be the far other end of the spectrum, kind of letting you go with it and checking in, every now and then. And so you want to make sure that their philosophy is aligning with yours. I'd like to think that I'm somewhere in the middle there, but, regardless, you need to, as an advisor, I have the expectation that my advisee will, work to make progress and be able to kind of motivate themselves to make progress towards their research goals. And that, I, as an advisor, will, commit to providing them the feedback and the support they need to reach those goals, but that, it's a two-way street. Both of us need to be putting in the work. And so,
oh yeah.
Yeah, those are certainly some of the important things. So in some projects, teamwork is a really important element. There's in others, it's largely an independent project where that independent motivation and sort of ability to work on your own may be more important, but on, maybe some big grant, there is a greater importance on, being a good communicator and a team worker and kind of helping other students with their work, because there's, interconnections between different projects. So, it's an important thing to, to have an understanding of what project you're working on, if you're like in a funded research assistantship, and what those sort of expectations might be.
Yeah, yes, exactly. Always good to ask questions about those expectations. And yeah, I'll figure out if they are lining up with what you're expecting and wanting, because yeah, somebody's ideal advisor could be somebody's like worst advisor. It just kind of depends on
Right.
the fit of what they're looking to do. Okay, cool.
I think writing is another really important one that's undervalued in engineering fields, especially. And that's something where, like, the personal statement gives a little insight on that. Some prospective advisors or advisors looking at prospective students may even request like an additional writing sample. It's something that in a research-based degree, there's an expectation that you're publishing, and so it can take a lot of time if you don't have a lot of experience on writing, and there's kind of a lot of editing steps that need to happen if you don't have a lot of writing experience. And so it is something, it's not a deal breaker, but it's good to see that you have some ability to kind of structure a good document and make your points come across, and be an effective communicator. So we do like to see some strength there. It's not just about the sort of technical side in engineering.
That's your product. Like with your 4 years, the thing you produce is papers, is writings. Like, you're not building a building, you're not like creating a business. Like, that's your product. So you have to make it as best as it can be. And that largely depends on your writing skills, which obviously you can always improve, but good to have some coming in. So yeah,
I would say, as a kind of aside about the personal statement too, I don't think I've ever seen one thus far that had a graphic in it. I would be super impressed if a student had some cool graphic related to like their research interests, or some kind of image. I think it's something that's generally not emphasized, but just kind of in terms of the products you were mentioning, writing being an important product out of research-based grad degrees, there's increasingly a focus on being an effective communicator and good presentations too, and having effective graphics is a really important part of that. Now, we don't expect everyone to be like an expert in graphic design, but you need to be able to put together an effective research presentation or to make a good summary graphic in your research. And so things like that can like help you stand out.
That's interesting. I agree, but I'm also worried that some people would find it like distracting, and they'd be like, this isn't a standard SOP. Why is this picture here? But so yeah, what would you include it if you were applying today? Would you put a graphic in?
I would consider it. I'm always a fan.
Okay. Good advice. Good food for thought. Yeah, and I know that also sometimes they'll ask them to do presentations or things like as part of like their interview. It's the same thing. It's like showing that you can put together I know pretty PowerPoints aren't the end all be all, but they are important, and having that is also a good thing.
And I think, there's been an increasing push to get rid of the GRE in a lot of departments. And I think the pandemic has kind of facilitated that because it's become a temporary release from that being a requirement in a lot of departments because it was challenging to take the exam. But then, there's concerns with the equity and the really how tightly the GRE really predicts performance. And so there's a lot of discussions about alternative ways of assessing a prospective grad student. And so I think
Yeah.
increasingly we might see these sort of alternative means of assessing, the ability to be a good researcher, to be a good
It's
communicator,
so
to be a
hard.
good writer.
It's so hard because you're judging people. You're not judging widgets. You know what I mean? So like you're trying to compare apples to oranges, is so hard. But that's awesome that they are continuing to evolve what they're looking for and how they're evaluating it. Very cool. Okay, I think that anything else you can think of in terms of what PhD applicants should be thinking about?
Yeah, I mean, I would just re-emphasize the, reaching out to a prospective advisor so that they know about you and, maybe they don't have funding, but they may say, they'll, at least they know about you. Maybe they'll make recommendation to a colleague who does have funding or, be in touch later if
At
something
any
else
time.
works
So
out. Yeah,
it's
it doesn't hurt
never,
to reach out.
yeah, it's never
Um,
like you have to wait till September. It can be any point in the year, really, because of what you
yeah,
said.
and just, find ways to convey your interest and your uniqueness. Why are you a good fit to the program? Make yourself stand out. I definitely get a lot of emails that feel like they're sort of form emails, and it's not even sometimes clear that they know my research interests, so make sure that you do that little bit of research before you reach out to someone. Make sure that you,
Okay, yeah.
are a good fit for their research
What,
area and that you
let me
have demonstrated interest
let me ask you a
in.
question. When you get those emails where it's unclear if they even know who the hell you are, what do you do with those emails?
Um, I generally try to at least respond and maybe just say I'm not currently looking for a grad student at
Yeah,
this time, or I just don't feel you're a good fit.
yeah.
Depending on the level of, depending on how they're written, sometimes I just don't have the time to respond to
Yeah,
certain ones that are just kind of, it's not clear that they've really even
I think that's
looked at what my area is.
I think that's 100% warranted. And also, like, yeah, they clearly aren't spending the time. So why should you spend your time to respond to something that, like, right? It's like it's a two-way street. So yeah, I think that's just clear for people to realize that if maybe they're not getting responses, they need to approach it a little bit differently, as you're kind of suggesting. But yeah, cool. Well, thank you so much. I think this is super great and good to hear your experience. And you are like, a huge, amazing research institution. So I'm sure a lot of this rings true for other institutions across the US and abroad. So yeah. Well, thank you.